Scott Tomaski says, Bill, you spent countless hours on TSL talking about the progressives and their unearned moral superiority. Does the opposite exist? I mean, is there such a thing as earned moral superiority? If so, who has it and how is it gained? Yes, there is such a thing as earned moral superiority. And the term I would use for earned moral superiority, it's I mud, not mun's women. Thank you, Dan Ramsey. I hate being out-trekked in my own Trek background. I got a freaking Gorn captain, here, and I've got, Mud's... I mud. It was worth a try. Yes, there is such a thing as earned moral superiority, and it normally just comes from either virtue or experience. I don't know the details about Mother Superior. If somebody were to tell me there's a dark side to this story, I'll believe you. But if there is, I haven't heard it. Mother Teresa has moral superiority. Mother Teresa can talk about sacrificing to help the poor because she has a life of sacrificing to help the poor, and she doesn't parachute in from Beverly Hills to help the poor for a weekend with the cameras rolling and then hand the stuff off to her publicist. Mother Superior made a decision to live what she said. And frankly, and there's the word I was looking for, you beat me to it, Lord TL, because this is basically what I was kind of teeing up for. In our society, I think one of the few people that have actual moral superiority have the ability to make a statement that says, I know something that you don't know, and I'm in a position to comment on this in a way that you're not. And I would give that that nod to veterans. I have an opinion about Iraq. I have an opinion about the use of force. And to be crystal clear about this, my opinion about Iraq is not my opinion about Iraq in contravention to what veterans say. My opinion about Iraq, for example, or Afghanistan or any of the other conflicts, is predicated on what I'm hearing from the veterans, who in fact have the moral superiority to talk about this. And why do they have moral superiority when Code Pink doesn't have moral superiority? Because the guys who are men and women who are signing up on the dotted line are risking their lives. They're actually risking their lives to defend this country. They're not just talking about it. I'm just talking about it. And so, yeah. Now, there's an important thing I want to say here. And this is, I'm glad you asked the question, because some of this is not, maybe not clear even to me. And that's why I love doing the show so much, because I learned so much from you guys. When I say that their weapon is unearned moral superiority, I don't mean to say that they're not capable of, I'm not saying that they're not allowed to make an argument. That's not what I'm saying at all. I have an opinion about the military, and my opinion is as valid as anybody else's opinion is about the military. I'm not saying they don't have a right to speak about war if they're not in the military. What I am saying is, when you come to progressives, that's all there is. That's all there is. They don't have an argument, so they have a posture. And that's why the posture is so annoying to me. It's why it's so disgusting to me. On some level, if we're talking about the fall of civilization, I've got the earned moral superiority because I've done nothing but study this. It's all I do. But that doesn't make me right, and it doesn't make me immune from argument. I might be completely wrong about these things. We're kidding. Of course I'm not. But I might be. So this is kind of what I'm getting at. You can look at for example, if somebody says that we need to get off of the power grid and that carbon dioxide is killing the planet, and they say this as they come to work in their Prius, and they've got a Save the Planet bumper sticker because their Prius gets 35 miles to the gallon and my Camaro gets 17. But if they drive 30, 40 miles every day and I only drive a mile every day to my studio, then they're actually putting out more greenhouse gas than I am. They don't have the moral authority over me that they claim to have. First of all, they're wrong about the carbon dioxide anyway, but they don't have the moral authority. That's all they've got. So what they want to do is they want to use the moral authority as the entire basis of their argument. So you have to knock that out of the way. Veterans have a morally superior stance to talk about war and conflict, especially combat veterans, have a morally superior position to talk about these things because they can genuinely say, I've been there, I've seen it, and you haven't. Okay. Shuts me up. I can have an opinion about what's going on the ground in Iraq, and if 50 guys come back and say, well, you're entitled to your opinion, but having been on the ground in Iraq, you're wrong, That trumps my argument as far as I'm concerned. But I don't want to be mistaken to say that you don't get to make an argument unless you have this moral superiority. Very few people actually have moral superiority. I was talking about the grid. Somebody's driving a Prius and so on. They talk about, oh, we got to save the planet and we got to cut our electrical, and we got to cut coal, we got to cut oil, we got to go to windmills. And then he goes home and turns on his widescreen TV and plays video games and sits down at Starbucks and gets out his Apple computer and writes posts about how evil corporations are. That's just plain hypocrisy. That's saying one thing and doing something else, and acting like you're superior when in point of fact you're not. Now, if a person, on the other hand, were living out in the wild in a tent with no electricity, making fire for fuel and cooking whatever they could find, then that person talking about getting off of the grid, I'd still be able to argue with that person. I still think they're wrong, but they at least have the authority that comes with living up to your beliefs. You're not a hypocrite. You say you're going to do something, you say you believe something, and then that's what you do. So to that degree, I think I certainly respect people like that. Which is why, on some level, while I think ISIS needs to be scattered all over the Middle East, and when I say I don't mean the organization, I mean every single one of them needs to be scattered all over the Middle East. I think they're the worst people on earth, and they may be among the worst people that ever lived. I know I can be clear about this. I respect ISIS. I don't admire them. In fact, I want every single one of them blown into atoms, and I don't want every single Berkeley professor blown into atoms. Are we crystal clear on what I'm saying here? I would like to see every member of ISIS exploded out over the desert, and I don't want to see any American citizens exploded out over the desert, but on some level, I respect ISIS for believing what they believe in and be willing to fight and die for it, rather than a Berkeley professor who is protected by the sacrifice of men and women that they despise, living a life of luxury and ease, and doing everything they can to make sure that that life of luxury and ease is upended by these murderers out in the desert. They are worse. Well, they're not worse people. I have to be careful about that. But they are certainly not morally superior to those people. I think most warriors would probably tell you, this is my experience from reading and lots of histories and talking to a lot of these guys, that more often than not, soldiers in conflict will respect the soldiers that they're facing in the field much more than they respect the people back home who are trying to lose the war for them, or for the politicians that may have put them in a bad situation, or whatever the case. So yes, and as Brian Yoder points out, I'm not saying you have an automatic win by arguing from authority. You don't get to say, well, I'm in the military, so therefore I'm right. You don't get to say that. You do get to say, well, I've been there, and this is what I saw. But you don't get to say, well, I'm in the military, you don't know anything about it, and so on. I can talk about education in America without being a teacher. And I can talk about military strategy and military intervention and moral case of right and wrong without being in the military. But I can't claim that I'm better than you are because I drive a car that gets more mileage than you, or I have a ribbon on my lapel or anything like that. That's really what I'm talking about. So to be honest with you, Scott, I don't really feel like anybody really has moral superiority. You asked, does it opposite exist? I think there's experience and there's authenticity is maybe a better word, but I don't know if anybody really has moral superiority over anybody. And if they do, that's not enough. You have to win the argument. You have to win the argument. You have to make sense. You have to make a better case. And hopefully, the people who make the best cases are the people who have had the most experience. If the topic were how to seduce 19-year-old college students by impressing them with how deep you are and how incredibly selfless you are and how you see things that no one ever else saw before, including why the enemy is right and why we're wrong, then you probably got the moral authority to speak on that subject and not be shot down for being a hypocrite. That's something you can talk about if you're a Berkeley professor of whatever. Or if you want to be a women's study professor and you want to talk about the harm done by an absent or an abusive father and the consequences downstream in terms of your hatred for men, then you can talk from a position of authority and experience, and I'd be willing to listen to you from that point of view. But When you start telling me you're better than you are because you believe in things, you have a bumper sticker on your car, is not going to get away with it from me. Not for me. You're going to have to make a case. There are some people in this world I respect. I respect soldiers enormously. I respect the huge majority of policemen. I respect first responders, firemen, all those other people. And I respect the quiet people that don't get any credit at all. I respect the guy that's up there somewhere right now, somewhere within several miles of where I am, or certainly within a couple hundred miles of where I am. Somebody somewhere right this second is sitting there watching a generator. They're in the control room. They're looking at dials and gauges. It's the night shift. It's dark outside. They're going to be there till midnight. And somebody somewhere is making sure that the power's on. And that person never, ever gets any credit. They never get any recognition. Nobody knows their names and nobody knows who they are. Somebody's keeping the water running. Somebody's making sure that all this stuff is happening. And if you want to talk about the people I actually have the most respect for, those guys come high, but the guys who come highest for me, truthfully now, honestly, are the people that do the cleaning up. I mentioned before the guy who works here as a janitor. He runs the parking concession by day. He's here at 7:30, 8 o'clock in the morning, runs the parking concession by day, closes it down at 6, and then he comes here and cleans the building until midnight. He does 2 jobs, and he works like a slave, and I have more admiration for this man than I have for just about any politician, just about any professor. The people that clean things up, the people that are sewer workers, the people that are dealing with waste management, that's not something I want to do, and they do it, and I'm very grateful for it, and I try to remember them as often as I can.